good morning, everybody, and welcome to this first Accelerate Cape Town webinar. I hope everyone is keeping well. I hope that you're all safe and all healthy at this time and keeping sane. You know, we're going into the second week of official lockdown, and this is, you know, once the novelty is worn off, where the mental aspects start becoming quite apparent and quite important. So I hope you're all keeping well. It certainly is an interesting time. I'm not sure myself at this stage whether this is an unmitigated disaster or actually a very unique opportunity for a global reset, and something that perhaps the world and the planet and all of us have needed. No doubt it's going to come with enormous pain. It's a little bit like ripping off the Band-Aid. You know, on reflecting on this, it was quite interesting for me that as Accelerate Cape Town, we've been talking about the workplace of the future for more than 2 years. Of course, none of us could have predicted that it would be sort of pushed on us at such a rapid pace and with so little pre-warning. But here we are. You know, this is the reality. We need to be resilient. We need to adapt to it. And we need to do whatever we can to respond as quickly as we can and to adapt as efficiently as we can to this new way of being. So thank you, all of you, for popping in this morning and coming to check out our very first webinar. It's a new space for all of us, I'm sure. So please feel free to ask questions as we go along. You'll find a very useful chat functionality down below, which you can use to sort of keep a conversation going. Sue our panelists today will also use the chat functionality to engage with you. And then at the end, we'll have a Q&A. So please feel free to pop some questions into the Q&A as we go along, and we'll address all of that afterwards. So you'll notice that this morning's session is slightly different from the Zoom meetings you may be accustomed to. This is a webinar, so all attendees start out muted, much like a real life engagement. So please feel free to sort of kick back with a cuppa and enjoy Sue's presentation. She'll be speaking for about 30 minutes. And following the presentation, if you'd then like to address the entire group, please raise your hand and I'll unmute you so that you can address the entire group, much like sort of a traditional event. So our panelist for this morning is Sue Morris from MetaView, and I'll do a proper intro a little bit later, but Sue's very graciously agreed to be our guinea pig for this very first webinar. So thank you very much, Sue, for that. So Sue will present, as I've said, for about 30 minutes. We want to keep these sessions sort of short and sharp and not too onerous. So about 30 minutes of presentation, which allows us 15 or 20 minutes for a bit of Q&A and interactive discussion afterwards. Of course, the conversation can continue much longer if there's a need for that. As I've said, please feel free to use chat, Q&A to pose questions. Afterwards, we will do a little short poll, if you don't mind, just answering a few questions around your experience of this event and what you'd like to see going forward and how Accelerate can better serve you in coming times. Without further ado, let me do a brief intro to Sue, and then we can kick right off. Sue is the founder of MetaView. She's a qualified executive coach with 20 years of leadership and consulting experience in corporate and medium-sized business, both in South Africa and the US. She works with executives and teams to improve business performance by focusing attention on the often neglected processes that undermine growth. She believes that without a compelling purpose, belief in shared values, and a psychologically safe environment, there will always be a gap between strategic intent and great execution. So certainly a lot of relevance for where we currently find ourselves, and hopefully some really useful insights that we can all take from today and use as we go forward. So without any further ado, Sue, over to you.
Thank you, Ryan, and hello, everybody. I can't see you, but you can see me, and yeah, I just hope to have as much of an interactive sort of presentation as we can have today, given the technology constraints. And of course, we're all holding thumbs that the bandwidth holds up. My speed test was very good this morning, so I'm really hoping that it stays that way. And yeah, just to say to Ryan and his team, to Kelsey and Nicole, a big thank you. I mean, it feels like about 5 minutes ago I sent you a mail to say, why don't we do this thing online? And here we are. So you know, that's a tremendous response, and I really appreciate you know, the agility with which you guys have transitioned. Yeah, so we're going to talk about, I'm going to share my screen now. You guys should all be able to see the dramatic image of the broken up road. And yeah, it's an image that for me really represented this massive seismic shift that I think we're all going through. So it's, yeah, and it certainly is dramatic. What I'd love for you guys to do today is to kind of sit back. This is a time for reflecting. It's a time for connecting, make space for some new ideas. And I'd love to have you contribute in the chat box. You know, if anything's coming up for you, any reflections that you'd like to share, any suggestions you have for the other leaders on the webcast, I think that would be great. And then at the end, Ryan will just help us coordinate some questions that you may have, or additional things that you'd like to contribute. For those who are fairly new to the webinar space and potentially introverted like me, you know, feel free. You know, you don't have to raise a hand. You don't have to speak to the group. The chat is fine, or otherwise do the reflections on your own. That's also absolutely fine. Whatever works. So yeah, let's get into the 4 pillars of leadership that I want to talk about today. So actually, before we start, I think it would be really useful just to have a check-in from everybody. We've got quite a few people listening today, but in the chat box, if you could please leave me just a thought on something that you're grateful for from lockdown. It's a strange and unusual time. And let's see what we've got coming through here. For me, actually, it's been, I'm just struggling to see the chat now. There we go. Yeah, time with family and young kids. I've also had the opportunity to do some yoga with my 15-year-old hockey playing son, which I must say would never have happened if it hadn't been for lockdown. Quite an amazing connection and experience. Progress to a new way of working. Wahid, absolutely. New learning opportunities, unbelievable time for learning. I've been listening to so many webinars. Yeah, that's brilliant. Less time in traffic, absolutely. not the most productive time. Quality time with family. Yeah, Barbara, absolutely. Yeah, time to step back, a little bit of time to pause and reflect. Learning to balance a 5-year-old. Yeah, the parenting and working from home is a seismic shift. I completely relate to that. Time to reflect on what authentic leadership is. Beautiful. Thank you, Carl. Catching up with friends and family. I love that. Quality time, staying connected through technology. Love those 2 thoughts. Actually sort of remind me of this polarity of the physical distance that we have, and yet the social closeness, in fact, that some of these technologies are allowing for us. Lovely. Chance to renew. Stunning. Chance to reflect on what exceptional leadership should look like. I hope we'll continue to do that today, Wendy. Yeah, learning a deep appreciation for things taken for granted, 100%. Self-leadership, pause and agility, and balancing work and young kids. Yeah, amazing. Thank you, everybody. Change leadership skills. Yep. In a business as usual environment. Yep. Lovely. Thank you, everybody. Yeah. So I think there's, yeah, a fascinating time, and many of us are finding, you know, quite a few positive things in the space that we're in, which is great. So, you know, it can be quite challenging in these virtual spaces just to to keep our attention. And I'm sure many of you are surrounded by other screens and phones, potentially children, dogs, all of that. So the question I'd like to ask is just how focused you'd like to be on it during the session. So really just setting an intention for that. So it can be any, if you pick a number from 1 to 10, many people choose 6. They've got other things that are going on, and that's completely cool. But just if you select a number, and then ask yourself if there's a way you can adjust your environment just to support that. So does it mean, for me, it's always switching off WhatsApp. I don't know what it means for you guys, but potentially just to make a call on exactly the sort of attention you'd like to give today. And we'll check in on at the end just to see how successful you've been with that. Okay, so I really loved this quote that I read the other day from Justice Malala. He's saying the rule book is useless to us now. These are uncharted waters. A lot has been turned on its head. And when we emerge, we're going to be quite a different country. And the only quality that will matter over the next few months and in the years of recovery will be building and rebuilding, will be leadership. And so that's why I think it's really important to have the sort of conversation that we're having today. If we look, if we believe the Boston Consulting Group modeling, we could be in lockdown until August. If we believe the complexity theorists and some of the economists, we're heading for a period of certainly unrest and ongoing complexity with an economy that will really struggle. So if we just really zoom out and broaden our attention just outside of this lockdown period, I think that's the scope with which we need to extend our leadership. So I borrowed this slide from a coaching friend who posted it on LinkedIn, and he had a session with a number of executives. He works in the complexity space, and it's Casper Willifser. And he had somebody draw up the conversation, and I thought it was really just very illustrative, potentially, of some of the complexity that's going on now. Absolutely the need for communication, time for action, the feeling of, I don't think I can hold on for much longer, just trying to balance this positive and accepting what's really going on here, trying to find your space of mindfulness, of breathing within the chaos, connecting to purpose and hope, and then really recognizing that people are in trauma, people are feeling overwhelmed, and that the rug has been pulled from underneath us, that actually, it says non-linearity here. The solutions that we've had in the past are maybe not going to help us really to get out of where we are today. So, and I guess my thoughts on this is that, what we don't need is some sort of homogenous kind of new age positivity. I don't think that's necessarily helpful. I think it is a very complex situation. I think that we're continuing to learn all the time, continuing to figure out what's real news, what's fake news, what's reliable, what's not. And certainly it's throwing us into a fairly chaotic and uncertain time. I no longer need to convince people that the world is uncertain. I think we're all sitting fairly and squarely in that space now. So I thought this was really useful. It's actually an assistant professor of political science at the University of Toronto called Aisha Ahmad. And she talks about the phases in crisis. She's been through a number herself. And I thought it was really just useful to sort of present this in a 3-step process, just and see how it resonates. Because I think one of the things that will happen, and certainly I believe has been happening, is that people are processing in very different ways. That could be team members, family members, etc. So really, and I suppose this first phase, the security phase, is kind of like the toilet paper phase, you know, where security and you know, we look inward. We need to take care of food, family, friends, you know, really securing all of those early conditions, and potentially supporting the vulnerable also, just making sure that, you know, people in our community are taken care of, and we actually allow ourselves, we should be allowing ourselves to feel the sense of that shock, to feel bad. And then slowly, with a bit of humility and patience, moving into a mental shift space, where we just really start to say, yes, there are going to be losses, and to acknowledge those. And we're really moving out of denial into the space of, yes, I am losing clients. Yes, I may not have sufficient cash flow. Yes, people are going to have to be laid off. And really moving to a space of, how do you think about the world now? And I love the idea of first principles, you know, when everything is stripped bare, you know, what is the essential value that your organization brings, and how do you then deliver that in this new environment? So really coming back to that. And I think to embrace and to rebuild, we need those strong foundations. And we're going to talk a lot about that in the upcoming slides. We need a new schedule. We need to have new ideas emerging, and we need to work to be really supportive of our teams. And that helps us to move forward, and then out of this process into the rebuilding process. So the first pillar that I want to talk about is empathy. And I'm going to sort of break that into empathy for self and empathy for team. And really, because in a systemic sense, we always link the individual, the team, and the organization, because they are part of a system. And so it's really important to understand our role in it, our role with our team, and our role in the organization. And in our individual world, it's really important to maximize our own resilience now. We have to manage overwhelm, and we have to really set ourselves up for really high quality thinking and decision making. So as leaders, you're going to need to be conscious about your way of being. You know, how are you showing up? Because it's really necessary sometimes to shift that, to be conscious of it, and to shift it to allow the system to respond positively. So I'm curious, and perhaps you guys can add in the chat box what your strategies and tips are for building your own resilience. We saw some of them, I think, coming out earlier in the things that you've loved about the lockdown. And what do you need to be more of to be at your best in this challenging time? Ryan? Oh, here we go. Meditation for me is key, a daily practice in the early morning. Lovely. Keeping on working, absolutely. Just keep going, keeping the momentum going. Self-reflection. Daily exercise, quality coffee. That's wonderful. Demonstrating vulnerability to our teams. Brilliant, Wendy. Managing energy, loving it. Focusing on purpose. Trying to avoid, social media, turning it off. Calm to start my day. Pausing, maintaining balance between work and family, to the extent that that's possible, Imelda. Yeah. A regular routine. Yep. Wonderful. Absolutely. Fantastic. Okay, so yeah, one of the things that I think, take a break, meaningful catch up with the team, lovely. Regular communication with the team, these are all excellent. Exercise, yeah, absolutely. So really, really fantastic ways to keep yourself strong. So the one thing I do want to talk about is fear. And Susan David at Harvard puts it beautifully. She says, it doesn't serve us to deny or try to push it away. On the contrary, what works and is restorative is to embrace, recognize, and accept fear as a natural human emotion. And it's normally, as she says, just a temporary response to a lack of control. And so in the science of resilience, you know, one of the key things is to recognize the fear when it comes up, to see it, to name it, and then really just to coexist with it, and to not let it control, because I think that takes us into the place of overwhelm. It was mentioned a lot there, meditation, and I think, you know, certainly if you're wearing an Apple Watch, it is telling you to breathe all the time, and there's again a lot of science behind that. You know, we need to take that threat response. If I look right now at the snake and I look in its face, I could actually feel the fear coming up. And one of the benefits of breathing is that it takes you out of that threat response phase. It almost tricks the brain into saying everything is okay, and allows you just to have the perspective that you need. So really important that we practice that when we feel the complexity, the lack of control coming up. Winning the inner game is another kind of science-backed strategy. And here it's really getting in touch with your inner dialogue, understanding the narrative that's going through your head, hearing it, and then also being compassionate about that, being compassionate if you're feeling afraid, being compassionate when there's negativity, but also being able to replace that potentially with something more positive. And I think some of you have already said this, you know, with the routine, to be able to pace yourself through this. So really understanding that you have to keep your reserve. You need to sleep well. If you're tired, you need to let somebody else take over. You need to eat well. You need to, you know, really nurture yourself as a resource and as the core of the system. You know, without that strength and resilience, it really is damaging to the system. And then finally, the other big one that a lot of the neuroscientists talk about is being grateful. And that's something that we started with up front deliberately, because it has a tremendous impact on our bias for negativity. So the more we're cultivating our gratitude and turning to the positive, the less we're tending to the negative that is, you know, it may or may not be true. So really the attempt here is to try and cultivate some sort of deliberate calm. And I see that you guys have a lot of strategies already for doing that. So this calm that allows you to detach a little bit from this very fraught situation, and to remain very grounded, absolutely important. And then taking this empathy further, how do we show empathy to team members? Because that would be the next sort of onion layer. You know, how do we do this for ourselves and then also with our teams? So if you guys could add again in the chat, how have you or how will you show empathy for your team members at this time? Listen authentically. Yeah, absolutely. Space for regular check-ins. Thank you. Hello, Kate. I share my personal struggles and make that, yeah, so vulnerability, man, that's fantastic. Listen for understanding. Different people have different needs. Lovely, lovely Gail. Vulnerable first, then empathetic. Opportunities to talk regularly. Beautiful, yeah. Yeah, letting people express their fears and concerns and just listening. Daily connect sessions, listening, support. Bongi, we're lovely. Regular check-ins. Caringly connect. Beautiful. The one-on-one calls. Yeah, absolutely. That's a great idea. We're all in the same boat. And we'll bring you along, Christian. Yeah. Starting the meeting with a check-in, yeah, before getting into business. Lovely, Barbara. Communicate more than ever before, 100%. Yeah, so bridging the work and the personal, yeah, fantastic. Yeah, all of that. Yeah, so I think, yeah, definitely themes there of acknowledging that personal and professional, and going to both of those spaces for people. And Gail, I think you said this affects people in different ways. So really doing that listening that you guys are talking about, so that you're paying careful attention to how people are struggling, what it is that's manifesting for them, be it an elderly parent or a revenue stream, a partner, whatever the case is. And I love that sense, you guys have nailed this, just the sense of community, of really getting to know your people. So not starting with, okay, what have we done? Where do we need to get to? What's next? But really engaging on a human level. You know, tell me what's going on for you. I love this question, actually. How are you feeling? And what is your energy level? Because that will wax and wane, I'm sure, depending on what's happening in everybody's lives. And I think there are extended ways, you know, as we potentially move in and out of this remote space as teams, there are other ways that we can virtually sort of keep connected and keep learning. And I love the idea of an online team assessment of styles and modes, like using the Enneagram to really build that knowledge and understanding of who we are as a team. It could be a really wonderful time to do that. And then I think what you guys have captured, but I like to just always, you know, bring it into the term, is really psychological safety. So only in that space will people be able to really bring forward their best and make the contributions, sort of step into their own agency is the way that I phrase it. So showing vulnerability, which you guys have spoken to there a lot, is the absolute essence of it. That's where it begins. But then also making sure that there's no fear of any form of retribution that goes on, so that the mistakes are discussable, they're allowed, they're learned from, and people feel free to go out, stick their necks out potentially, and do something on behalf of the team, on behalf of others. And that's sort of where, you know, that's the foundation of the innovation that we're going to need at this time. And then I think one other thing that I'm not sure came up is just, again, really in light of our bias for negativity, is to really focus on the positive contributions and the positive progress that the team is making. So I'm really not talking about the sort of the Pollyanna New Age positivism here. I'm talking about getting people into a positive emotional state. And there's a huge amount of neuroscience around this, both in coaching and also outside of coaching, just how people really are at their best when they're feeling in that positive emotional state, when they're playing to their strengths, when they understand what those are. So those are, yeah, thank you for your thoughts there. I think some wonderful ways to bring the team in on empathy. The second thing I want to talk about is mindset. And as leaders, you guys probably, you know, hear about this all the time. But I think in general, there are moods that pervade our countries. In this instance, may even be the globe. Our organizations, our families, our, you know, and ourselves. We operate in moods also. And at times we're not really conscious of these moods. We sort of operating in them without really being aware of them. And so I think it's really important to step back and be intentional. And I think with some of the practices that you guys were talking about, the meditation, the pausing, the sort of zooming out, you will be able to get to a point where you have a mantra or a phrase or a way of being that's realistic, that's bounded optimism, and that embodies the sort of mindset and behaviors that you, your teams, your organization need right now. And of course, you know, politicians are very good at this in their campaigns. And I always think of the "Yes, we can" mantra that Obama used, and how powerfully that was communicated, and the sort of possibilities that it opened up for people, the real belief He's actually got a new one now, which I thought I would share, just because I'm not sure that punch today in the face is the ideal one. Use it if you want to, but it's the only slide I could find. So Obama's new mantra is show up, dive in, and stay at it. And I really love that. You know, pitch up even if you're not feeling like it. Do what you can, dive in, do what you can, and then do it with as much resilience as possible. So yeah, so that mindset and being intentional about it, just absolutely critical. And then you guys have already mentioned communication, and it was a lot in the upfront chaotic slide. Yeah, relentlessly communicating, and that's important. There's nothing worse than silence in a time of crisis. And yet, some of the data coming out of the States now, this is Gallup data, says only 43% of workers strongly agree that their employer cares about their well-being. So that's less than half are feeling like they're really cared for. And only 38% strongly agree that they're confident in the leadership of their organization to successfully manage emerging challenges. Now, that's not great. Those are not great numbers. So it's really important, I think, to have a strategy for communication. You need to have a sense of the order in which you communicate the decisions and priorities. And you really need to be communicating the right content. And this was also referred to in the chat. I can't remember who did it, but reconnecting to your mission or purpose. You know, really asking yourself, why is it that we're here? And repeating that, you know, and repeating it and connecting your teams and your organization to that, and asking in a broader sense how you might support your customers and your community in line with that mission. Of course, keeping to your values, making sure that the communication is very much aligned with that. And I do think there, you know, what I love about values is that it's, you know, culture is everybody's job. This isn't just about you as leaders. So, you know, feel free to challenge everybody to find the right way to communicate, to live up to those values, and to show them. You know, it's their values also. I think managing expectations. This is a tough one, of course, because we're uncertain. We certainly know this isn't a sprint. You know, the sprint marathon metaphor has been used quite a lot. But I did love what one of the writers said: if we think this is a sprint and we sprint now, we're going to be puking on our shoes before we're out of lockdown. And we definitely don't want to be doing that. We want to prepare ourselves as well as our teams for this crisis to continue for 12 to 18 months, and certainly to be followed by a slow and potentially complicated recovery. So really learning to pace and embed that resilience, you know, through all those methods that we've spoken about. One of the other pieces of advice is just to stick to the facts. So clear, concise, short communication without guessing how people are feeling. You know, the shorter it is, a little video comms, the more likely it is to happen, the more connected people are going to feel. Again, without false optimism, really importantly. I like the idea also of involving others. If there's a response team or a team that you've got that are working on particular areas, to bring them into the communication. You know, they're at the front lines. It feels more authentic that way. And then I suppose the other thing, just also in line with the time frame, is that I don't think communication can just be for now, for this crisis period. I think it needs to keep on going. You know, I'm going to ask you the question now about what's happened for you in your organizations. And I think it's worth continuing a lot of that and planning to continue that. And then finally, just to enable the remote communication platforms, you know, Slack and Trello, WhatsApp groups can be useful, and they're not my favorite, but if you are able to fast track or enable those, you know, very quickly when people are working remotely or when we're going potentially in and out of lockdown, there's still a water cooler effect. People are still able to communicate informally as well as formally. Those are really, really good platforms to consider. So again, just to have you guys contribute in the chat about what this crisis has taught you about communication in your organization. What have you learned? Communicate more than ever before. Check in not only on work but also personal. Silence becomes disengagement. Thank you, Gail. That's beautifully put. Empathy for different team members and struggles. Quality communication. Regular, consistent, keeps us grounded. Visible, communicate authentically. Hello, Kim. Yes. Skype meeting shorter, more impactful. Yep. Amazing. We had a Zoom call each morning with staff talking about the business at large by each department. It hasn't happened before. Fantastic. So there's definitely a different sense of what can be communicated and how. Okay, sorry about that. I have to keep moving around to try and find the chat. So the final pillar that I want to talk about is flexible operations. This is a fairly challenging one, but for sure, as leaders, you're not going to know all the answers, and nobody expects you to. So there really is such an opportunity here to call on all your resources, all the humans in teams and organizations, and to look to all the capabilities. To bring them together into subtasks, to different task forces, teams of teams potentially, you know, so that everybody can be working towards the same goal, but not necessarily managed in a hierarchical fashion. Certainly bounded, but not managed in that way. Because only in this flexibility, I think, are we going to see the sort of innovation and rapidity of adoption of change that we're going to need to really rebuild. So yeah, the existing systems are not likely to support what we need now. We know that you know, socially there could potentially be some unrest, and so we need to get to this distributed kind of space of thinking and working. And as Dave Snowden says, he's one of the complex adaptive systems theorists. He says, you know, if we're not adapting now, if we don't get this, if we don't make the change here, certainly climate change will be the next thing, and it will be much worse. So we really have to be evolving to the extent that we can, to have and operate in systems that are more flexible and more responsive. So we have to ask, you know, what has to be done, what doesn't? You know, what happens when the team is smaller? You know, who takes which roles? How can we be flexible about that? What processes do we not need? You know, what in the system here can be cleaned up so that we can focus on the real value that can be delivered. And I think really importantly, linking to this idea, an idea of diverse perspectives. I don't know if you guys are familiar with this, the gorilla in the lungs experiment. And just to give you a sense of what it was a task where there were 24 radiologists, and they were asked to look at a pair of lungs, and they put in there a nodule that was 48 times larger than the average nodule, and it was inserted into the last set of X-rays, and it was in the shape of a gorilla. Now, possibly not as obvious as the image I'm showing you now, but they eye-tracked the radiologists, and the vast majority looked directly in the location of the gorilla, and the vast majority of them didn't see the gorilla. So this is a bias that they call inattentional blindness, that actually sometimes when we're all seeped in the same data and we are all looking at something from the same vantage point, we're actually not bringing the diversity that we need to see the things that are really happening. So this really, you know, stretches us to say, you know, how can we explore contradictions? You know, who's missing from the discussion that might disagree with us? What's holding us back? You know, how do we engage with people on the level of what they're really thinking rather than what they're saying? How do we strip out the hierarchy and the sort of power dynamic to get to what they're really thinking? How do we encourage the diversity? You know, in systems theory, again, your internal system needs to be as diverse as the external system in order for you to be responding appropriately. So how do you up that? Who else needs to be at the table? Who else needs to be included in the decision making? Yeah, and really just understanding what innovations will create new patterns. And that's, you know, that's really the intention, is to have these smaller teams be much more innovative, seeing things differently and taking action. And of course, one other point just to make is that in this situation and in this remote working and in this stretch to give teams more accountability, there's the ultimate question of trust always comes up. You know, how do I trust a team to operate independently? And I love this quote from Ernest Hemingway. It just says the best way to find out is to trust, if you can, is just to go ahead and do it. And sometimes that's the leap of faith. I think that we haven't up until now been courageous enough to take. So to ask you guys again, how can you distribute cognition? So how can you distribute thinking and decision making in your organization? Or how can you enable your team to be more self-directed? Okay, Gail says she loves the Management 3.0 game, Decision Poker. Moving to virtual would be interesting. I'm not familiar with that, Gail, but it sounds great. Just really taking decision making, potentially teaching people how to take accountability for decisions. Interesting. So you guys are welcome to continue to add in the chat. I think I'm just going to share that again. So then just a question to everybody, just to check in on how you managed with your focus, whether you met your goal, whether it was 6 or 7 or 9. How did you manage to stay focused in the session? And then finally, maybe just some thought starters for Q&A. Was there anything challenging for you in what was presented or discussed? Perhaps was there anything that you felt was really missing? I think that would be useful also. And what's the most important thing that you learned from the session today? And perhaps one thing that you can commit to doing differently for yourself or for your teams. I think I'm going to sign off, Ryan, and potentially hand over to you for some Q&A. But thank you all for your time and your attention. Do feel free to look me up on LinkedIn, or if you're interested, in learning more about coaching and potentially crisis coaching, support for team members or otherwise, you're welcome to have a look at my website. But thanks to everybody. I'm going to stop the share now and hand over back to Ryan.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Gail. Let me just do this real quick. There we go. Yeah, I hope you've all enjoyed that. I was very, very pleasantly surprised and encouraged by the level of interaction. So yeah, so thank you all for getting stuck in, for your contributions, for participating. I thought as a first session, it was quite encouraging. I thought it went quite well. And I think it bodes well for the future. I mean, for me, I think there were some very clear positives. Coming out of all of this, despite the short-term pain of rapid adjustment. I know for myself, for one, I look forward to never having to buy pants or shoes ever again, and only focusing on pajamas and slippers going forward. So that's really awesome. And I think at times like this, it is really important to try and find and cling to and unearth the positives and what we can take from this. And so thank you, Sue, really for your guidance in that and for steering us in that direction. I think let's open it up to Q&A. I'm not sure if anyone has any additional questions which you'd like to pop over into the Q&A, which I think could possibly work a little bit better than the chat stuff. But feel free to use either. I mean, maybe just to kick us off as people type away, and also just to say, if anybody does want to address the entire group and sort of be unmuted, please just raise your hand and I'll give you the opportunity to engage the entire group. But so just as people are sort of thinking about that, I think something that I'm really struggling with, you know, you mentioned the need for pace and the need to sort of pace yourself, that this is not a sprint race, it's a marathon. But how do you sort of balance this desire and this need to want to sort of get stuck in and help and be busy and be active and respond with the need to sort of pace yourself and do things calmly and find a useful way in which to contribute, as opposed to a lot of the sort of knee-jerk panic reaction that we're seeing at the moment. Any thoughts around that? I'm not sure if Sue can.
Sorry, Ryan.
Yeah.
I have to admit, I got carried away in the chat. This is completely bad.
Well, maybe the next session should be on multitasking. That might be useful for a lot of us at the moment.
I think you were asking a question about how do we have focus and how do we balance?
It was around balance, because, you know, I have this constant sense that, you know, as leaders, we need to be getting stuck in, we need to be doing stuff, we need to be helping, and we need to be making a difference somehow. And I'm seeing a lot of sort of knee-jerk panic reaction, and a lot of people, you know, some organizations are emailing me 3 times a day, every single day at the moment. And it seems a little bit much. And sort of the question was, you know, are there any strategies or any guidance you can give us in terms of how we balance that overwhelming desire to get stuck in immediately and do stuff versus the need to really pace ourselves and not burn out? Because the reality is, you know, just on my reading of it and seeing sort of what's happening globally, I seriously doubt that the lockdown is going to be lifted on the 16th of April. In fact, I'm of the view that it would be irresponsible to do that at this stage in the pandemic in South Africa. And I do think there's going to be a need to sort of settle down into this new way of doing things. But it becomes difficult to manage that constant bubbling up of tension and the need to sort of want to go and do stuff and get stuck in and distribute masks or whatever the case might be. And so are there any specific strategies or guidance that you can give us in terms of finding that balance?
Yeah, I mean, I think the first point is just that, you know, if you're panicking and if you're feeling overwhelmed and you're just acting, you know, it's often not very strategic. So there really has to be, you have to create the space to say, okay, what can I do now? What should I do now? And contextualize it in a longer term framework. Now, I know the uncertainty is there. So when I say long term, I'm not talking extensive, but you've got to have that longer perspective, you know, that this is, so we don't know how long lockdown's going to happen. We don't know whether we're going to be in and out. We don't know what the rules are going to be. But yes, we have to, so yes, there are times when you have to act, and you have to act quickly in order to really get things going. And I think we've been through a rapid phase of that for many of the leaders on the call. I'm sure it's been intense, absolutely intense, you know, preparing for lockdown, etc. And then to I suppose porpoising might be a good metaphor, you know, to go and do it and then to step out. So it's the zoom in, zoom out, you know. So yes, act, go for it, make something happen, but then zoom out again. Where are we? Let's bring in new information. What else have we learned? And go again. So actually, it's quite an agile process, is what I'm describing. You know, so it's go do something, get it done quickly, do it 80%, come back, learn. You know, what else do we know? What do we know today that we didn't know yesterday? And how do we move that thing forward? So that would be my suggestion, is really trying to get teams to operate in that way. So, you know, not waiting till everything's final, not waiting till you've got all the information, because that's, you know, can't operate like that. Nothing will move forward. So there has to be momentum. but there also has to be, processes, I think, processes to step back and look and say, what are we really trying to do here? What should we be trying? And are they going in the right direction?
So focus on the ultimate objective and what you hope to achieve, and then go about doing that in a calm and structured manner, as opposed to sort of just diving right in and doing whatever you can, because it seems like the right thing to do at that particular moment.
Yeah, and I think, Ryan, your key word there is value. How are you delivering the value to your end consumers? Always the question. And so it's a different world, so it's a different way you deliver that value, but are you still delivering that value to your consumer, to your community, to your staff, whatever it is? So asking that question, because if it's off track, then it's unstrategic.
Just a quick note that I have opened up a poll. So for those who are still around, if you wouldn't mind just going over to the polls and answering 3 little questions, it'll really help us to sort of guide the series and how we could potentially add value to all of you going forward. I see on the chat an interesting question around performance management, remote performance management, and when you've had an errant team member in a normal scenario, that becomes exponentially worse under a work from home sort of scenario. Any insights in terms of how one should deal with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's, it's probably a process that should have started offline. It doesn't matter if it hasn't. I mean, I would probably do, I don't know, I'm not sure what's possible, given, I would need to understand more about the context, but there are ways for bringing in accountability one-on-one, giving people the opportunity to sort of step over some of what is preventing them from leaning in. And sometimes, sometimes that's much more complex than we initially understand, but really going to that person and engaging with them. There's a wonderful tool, Jonathan Raymond, the accountability dial, which is really a very thoughtful process on how to manage accountability. And so it starts with a light conversation, it moves into a heavier one, and it continues to hold people accountable, but in a gentle way, a gentle but very firm way. And I think that that might be useful. But again, not given the context, it's difficult to.
Okay, so yeah, I think we've run out of time. Amazingly, that hour has gone by incredibly quickly. I think for me, as I've mentioned, there are quite a few takeaways for me. So thank you very much, Sue. Really appreciated your time. Appreciated you being willing to be the guinea pig on this session, which ultimately I think actually went quite well. It's a brave new world. I mean, I love the comment from Gavin Fitzmaurice earlier. 4IR has happened, and it's good. I don't think any of us expected it to happen quite as rapidly, but it's here. And I think all of us already possess the tools and the mechanisms that we need to get through this. We just need to slow it down a little bit, find that place of calm, and then think very clearly about where we're trying to get to and what kind of value we're trying to deliver and the new ways of delivering that. So for me, certainly it's been massively valuable. I think on a personal note also, it becomes important to accept that it's okay to not be okay at this time, but it's also okay to enjoy the time and to use it and to accept that you're going to flip-flop between those emotions multiple times a day. The importance of empathy, both for self and others, and the understanding that fear is really just a response to this lack of control. And by using these sorts of mechanisms and new ways of working, we incrementally start regaining that control and hopefully dissipate some of that fear. So for me, some really useful and valuable takeouts. For everybody else still on the call, please feel free to drop us a note, engage us. I'm not sure if the poll has worked, or if any of you can actually see it down on the bottom of your screen, to just sort of click on that and see if it pops up and maybe go through that. But if not, we'll find other ways to engage you, and we'll do it better the next time. But on that note, bang on 11 o'clock. Fantastic. Thank you very much, Sue. Thank you, everybody, for checking in, for engaging, and for your fantastic level of interaction. We have recorded the entire session. We'll make it available on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, and also post a link on our website for anyone that would like to watch it at leisure afterwards. And we look forward to doing more of these and engaging you further as we go along, and hopefully getting better at it as we go along. So thank you, everybody. Keep safe, keep well, and we look forward to seeing you at the next one. Till then, cheers.